Hello and welcome back to the channel. And if this is your first time here, then let me say a very warm welcome to you. Because today we are going to talk about something that literally changes lives. And that is, how to speak English fluently and confidently. And I promise you that by the end of this video, you will have a completely different understanding of what it actually takes to speak fluent English. Because most people think that fluency means knowing every single grammar rule, memorizing thousands of words, and being able to write perfect essays, but let me tell you right now, that is not what fluency is. Fluency is the ability to express your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas, and your opinions, and your opinions, without translating every sentence in your head first, and without feeling that constant fear that you are going to make a mistake in front of other people. And today I am going to give you 5 very simple, very practical, and very powerful steps that you can start using from today, from this very moment, to build that fluency and that confidence. So grab a notebook, grab a pen, sit comfortably, and let's get started, because this is going to be a long and detailed video where I am going to break down each step, give you examples. Before we even talk about grammar, before we even talk about pronunciation, we need to talk about the way you think about English and the way you think about mistakes. Because here is the truth. Most people who struggle with English are not struggling because they don't know enough words. They are struggling because they are scared. They are scared of being judged. They are scared of sounding stupid. They are scared that someone is going to laugh at them. And this fear is so powerful that it actually blocks the brain from accessing the words that you already know. Your brain literally puts up a wall between what you know and what you can actually produce in that moment. So the very first thing you need to do, starting today, is to give yourself permission to make mistakes. Because mistakes are not a sign of failure. Mistakes are a sign that you are actually trying. And every single person who speaks English fluently today, whether they are a native speaker or a non-native speaker, made thousands and thousands of mistakes before they became fluent. Nobody, and I mean nobody, skipped that stage. So I want you to repeat this sentence after me, right now, out loud if you can. Say this: I am allowed to make mistakes. And every mistake I make is helping me get closer to fluency. And I really want you to internalize this, because this single mindset shift is going to remove so much pressure from your shoulders. And once that pressure is gone, you will notice that words start coming to you more easily. Your sentences start flowing more naturally, and you stop pausing every 2 seconds trying to find the perfect word. Because here is something interesting. Even native English speakers make grammar mistakes all the time. They say things like me and him went to the store, instead of he and I went to the store. They use double negatives. They mix up their tenses in casual conversation, and nobody stops them and says that's wrong. Because in real, natural everyday communication, the goal is not perfection. The goal is connection. The goal is being understood, and being able to understand others. So step number 1 is this. Change your mindset from I need to speak perfectly to I need to communicate effectively. And once you make that shift internally, everything else becomes so much easier. And one more thing about mindset before we move to step 2. I want you to stop comparing your beginning to someone else's middle, because so many people watch fluent English speakers on YouTube or in movies and they think, I will never speak like that. But what they don't see is the years of practice, the thousands of hours, the countless embarrassing moments that person went through to get to that level. So your only job is to compare yourself today to yourself yesterday. Are you a little bit better than you were last week? Are you understanding a little bit more than you did last month? That is the only comparison that matters. Now let's move on to step number 2. And step number 2 is building your vocabulary the smart way. And I want to be very clear here. I am not telling you to sit down and memorize a dictionary. That approach does not work. And I am sure many of you have tried it before. You open a vocabulary book. You memorize 50 new words in one day, and by the next week you have forgotten almost all of them. This happens because your brain does not store isolated words very well. Your brain stores words in context. Your brain stores words connected to images, connected to emotions, connected to situations. So instead of memorizing random word lists, what you need to do is learn vocabulary through exposure and through context. And this means consuming English content every single day, watching English movies with English subtitles, not subtitles in your own language, but English subtitles, so you can connect the sound of the word with the spelling of the word, and with the meaning at the same time. Because your brain absorbs language passively, even when you are not actively studying. Reading English articles, English blogs, English short stories, that match your level, not something too advanced that frustrates you, and not something too easy that doesn't challenge you, but something just slightly above your current level. And whenever you come across a new word, I want you to do something specific. I want you to write that word down in a notebook, along with the full sentence where you found it. Not just the word alone, in a notebook, along with the full sentence where you found it. When you connect it to your own reality, your brain remembers it much, much better than if you just memorize a definition. And here is another very powerful technique. Learn words in groups, not individually. Learn phrases, learn collocations, which means words that naturally go together. For example, instead of just learning the word decision, learn the phrase, make a decision. Because in English, we don't say do a decision, we say make a decision. And instead of just learning the word decision, we say make a decision. And instead of just learning the word mistake, learn the phrase, make a mistake. And instead of just learning the word decision, we say make a decision. And instead of just learning the word decision, we say make a decision. And instead of just learning the word decision, learn the phrase, make a decision. And instead of just learning the word advice, learn the phrase, give advice, or take advice. Are what make your English sound natural, instead of sounding like a direct translation from your native language. And I also want to talk about something called active vocabulary versus passive vocabulary. Passive vocabulary is words you understand when you hear or read them, but you don't use them yourself when speaking. And active vocabulary is words you can actually produce, actually use, in your own speech without thinking. And the goal of a fluent speaker is to constantly convert passive vocabulary into active vocabulary. Either speaking out loud to yourself, writing them in a journal, or using them in actual conversations. Because a word you use 5 times becomes a word you own forever, while a word you just read once and never use again will disappear from your memory within days. Now let's move to step number 3. And step number 3, which I believe is the single most important step of all, is daily speaking practice. Because here is a hard truth that nobody wants to hear. You cannot become fluent by only weathering. Fluency is a physical skill, just like playing the piano or riding a bicycle. You cannot become fluent by only watching videos. You cannot become fluent by only watching videos. You cannot become fluent by only studying grammar books. You cannot become fluent by only watching videos. 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 You cannot become. And physical skills require repeated physical practice. When you speak, your mouth, your tongue, your jaw are making specific movements that they are not used to making if you grew up speaking a different language. And these muscles need training, just like any other muscle in your body. So if you only study English, but you never actually speak it out loud, your mouth muscles will never develop the ability to produce English sounds smoothly and naturally. And this is why so many people can read and their mouth has never been trained. So how do you practice speaking every single day, even if you don't have anyone to practice with? And I want to give you several techniques here. The first technique is called shadowing. And shadowing means you listen to a native speaker, maybe from a movie, a podcast, or a YouTube video, and you repeat exactly what they say at the same time as them, trying to copy their pronunciation, their rhythm, their intonation, their speed. This is incredibly powerful because it trains your mouth to move the way a native speaker's mouth moves, and it trains your ear to recognize natural speech patterns. Start with short sentences, maybe just 5 to 10 seconds of audio, and repeat that same clip 5, 10, even 20 times until you can say it smoothly. The second technique is talking to yourself. And I know this might sound strange, but talking to yourself in English out loud every single day is one of the most effective ways to build speaking fluency, because it removes the social pressure of talking to another person. So you can focus completely on the language itself. Describe what you are doing while you are doing it. For example, while you are making tea, say out loud, "Now I am boiling the water. Now I am adding the tea leaves. Now I am waiting for it to steep." Narrate your day. What matters is that you are producing English sounds and English sentences out loud every single day. The third technique is recording yourself. Take your phone, choose a topic, and record yourself speaking for 2 to 3 minutes, without stopping, without preparing a script. Just speak naturally about that topic, and then listen back to the recording, and I promise you, this can feel uncomfortable at first, because most people don't like the sound of their own voice. But this exercise is incredibly valuable because you will start noticing your own patterns. Maybe you notice some, and once you notice these patterns, you can consciously work on fixing them, and I recommend doing this at least 3 times a week, and keeping your old recordings so you can compare them after 1 month, after 3 months, after 6 months, and you will be amazed at how much progress you can see and hear. The fourth technique is finding a speaking partner, or a conversation exchange partner. There are many apps and websites designed specifically for this purpose, where you can find someone who is learning your native language and wants to practice with you, while you practice English with them. And the fifth technique, if you have a little bit of budget, is hiring an online English tutor for even just 1 or 2 sessions per week, because a tutor can give you real-time correction, real-time feedback, and structured conversation practice that pushes you outside your comfort zone in a supportive environment. Now let's move to step number 4. And step number 4 is understanding grammar as patterns, not as rules to memorize. And this is a shift in thinking that changes everything, because traditional education often teaches grammar as a set of rules that you memorize and then apply consciously while speaking. But this approach is actually very slow and it creates hesitation. Because if you are trying to remember a rule while speaking, you will always be 1 step behind the conversation. Instead, I want you to think of grammar as patterns, as templates, as sentence structures that you practice so many times that they become automatic. For example, instead of memorizing the rule, we use the present perfect tense to describe an action that started in the past and continues in the present. I want you to simply practice the pattern, I have been English, over and over again with different examples. I have been learning English for 2 years. I have been living in this city for 5 years. I have been working at this company for 6 months. And once you practice this pattern enough times, with enough different examples, your brain starts to recognize it as a natural chunk of language, not as a rule you have to calculate. And this is exactly how children learn their first language. They don't study grammar books, they hear patterns repeated thousands of times by their parents and the people around them. Like conditional sentences such as, if I had more time, I would travel more. Like modal verbs for suggestions such as, you should, you could, you might want to. And then practice that one pattern in 20 or 30 different sentences about your own life, your own opinions, your own experiences. Say them out loud, write them down, use them in conversations that week. And by focusing on one pattern at a time, instead of trying to learn all of English grammar at once, you avoid feeling overwhelmed and you actually build real, usable fluency. And I also want to mention something important here. Don't be afraid of imperfect grammar while speaking, because in real conversations that week, and by focusing on one pattern at a time, instead of trying to learn conversations that week, and by focusing on one pattern at a time, instead of trying to learn all of English grammar at once, you avoid feeling overwhelmed, and you actually build real, usable fluency. And I also want to mention something important here. Native speakers care much more about whether they understood you and whether the conversation is flowing naturally, than about whether every single verb tense was technically correct. Grammar accuracy matters much more in formal writing, in academic papers, in professional emails, but in daily spoken conversation, communication, and confidence matter more than perfection. And finally, let's talk about step number 5. And step number 5 is immersing yourself in real English in real time, with real people, in real conversation. And I know this is the step that scares most people the most, because it means stepping out of your comfort zone, it means risking embarrassment, it means facing the fear we talked about back in step 1. But this is also the step that creates the fastest and most lasting improvement, because nothing trains your brain to think and respond in English faster than actual real-time conversation with real consequences and real stakes. So how do you create this immersion, even if you don't live in an English-speaking country? First, change the language settings on your phone, your computer, your social media apps to English. Join online communities, forums, Discord servers, Facebook groups, or local meetup groups where English is the primary language of communication. and participate actively. Don't just read silently. Comment, ask questions, share your opinions. Third, if possible, travel to an English-speaking environment, even for a short trip, because full immersion, where you have no choice but to use English to order food, ask for directions, and have daily interactions accelerates fluency in a way that nothing else can match. Fourth, watch English content without any subtitles at all. Once you reach an intermediate level, dozed. Once worth. Clear speech in textbook audio. And fifth, and this is extremely important, seek feedback regularly, whether from a tutor, a language exchange partner, or even by using speech recognition and pronunciation apps that give you instant feedback on your pronunciation accuracy. Because without feedback, you might be practicing your mistakes over and over again, reinforcing them instead of correcting them. So feedback is what turns practice into progress. Now, before we finish, I want to give you a simple daily plan that combines all 5 steps into one routine that you can actually follow. Starting tomorrow morning, wake up and spend 10 minutes talking to yourself in English about your plans for the day. Then during your commute or your free time, listen to an English podcast or watch a short English video and write down 3 new words or phrases with their context. Then in the afternoon, take 1 grammar pattern and write 10 sentences using it. Then read them out loud. In the evening, spend 15 minutes doing shadowing practice with a short video clip. And once or twice a week, have an actual conversation, whether with a language partner, a tutor, or even in a comment section, a voice chat, or a community group. And before bed, record yourself speaking for 2 minutes about your day, and keep that recording. And if you follow this simple routine consistently, on Watch Your Day, you will notice a dramatic difference in your ability to think in English, to respond quickly, and to speak with confidence. And I want to leave you with one final thought. Fluency is not a destination that you arrive at one day and then you're done. Fluency is a skill that you build and maintain through consistent action. And confidence is not something you wait to feel before you start speaking. Confidence is something you build by speaking, even when you don't feel ready, even when you're scared, even when you make mistakes. So my challenge to you today is this. Right after this video ends, I want you to speak 1 full sentence out loud in English about anything, about how you're feeling right now, about when you late. Even just 1 sentence, because that 1 sentence is the first step of your journey toward real fluency and real confidence. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. If you found this helpful, please make sure to share it with a friend who is also learning English, and I will see you in the next video. Keep practicing, keep believing in yourself, and remember, every fluent speaker was once a beginner who simply refused to give up.